Well, good evening, everybody. What a fabulous event, HealthTO, TechTO, Business of Cannabis. This is just terrific to see. Nobody wants to hear a lawyer talk, so I'll be very, very brief. But as Jay mentioned, my name is Eric Foster. I'm one of the leaders of the cannabis practice at Denton's. We have what we believe is the largest and leading cannabis practice in the country. We're also a global firm, so we're the only law firm with a global cannabis practice, working regularly with our cannabis teams in the US, Europe, South America, Australia. Anywhere there is business of cannabis, that's where we are doing business. And we've just had a great time associating with the terrific team involved tonight. But more importantly, we have Adarsh and Alex here. So why don't you quickly just introduce yourselves and tell everybody what you're about.
Hello, hi everybody. So I'm Adarsh Datta. I am the startup lead with Microsoft Canada. So as a part of my work, I essentially manage the relationships with our startup incubators and accelerators. So essentially manage the relationships with Mars Discovery District, with Communitech, with DMZ in the Toronto-Kitchener-Waterloo region. In the West, we work with BC Tech Association. In the East, we work with ElSpark in Ottawa and Found Fuel in Montreal. So essentially through these partner accelerators, we reach out to the top startups and we try and help them get onboarded onto the Microsoft platforms and technology, primarily focused on the cloud. It's called Azure. Hopefully, a lot of you have heard of that. And it's a great space to be in because I keep seeing the most innovative startups coming in, talking about what's new and what's next, and what's really disrupting the industry and the large enterprises these days. So that's me.
We're Leaf Forward, and we're a cannabis business accelerator. And what we're doing is we're trying to build up the cannabis ecosystem, the startup ecosystem. And we're doing that in a few ways. And the first is, and I'm going to acknowledge and I'm going to beg for forgiveness for TechTO, we're doing meetups in Toronto, and we really started it by completely ripping off TechTO. We saw their model, we saw that was great, and we said, we need to do this for cannabis. So we launched a meetup in Toronto. We've been doing that for about a year and a half, and we've since expanded to run cannabis industry meetups in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. So that's the first step in really building up a startup ecosystem within cannabis. Secondly, we're running boot camps to help early stage cannabis businesses. Our next one's coming up in July. Check it out, leafforward.org. And we're transitioning, we'll say, to from a pre-seed accelerator to a true accelerator in the fall when we're looking to raise a fund right now and go out there and start actually running and providing capital for those businesses.
Terrific. So, you guys have seen a lot, and so have we. People ask me all the time, what's the most, surprising thing you've seen in the industry? And, I think it's actually the speed at which the industry has become sophisticated and legitimate. But, I guess from a startup perspective, what is the biggest surprise that you've seen working in this industry so far, Adarsh?
So I think the biggest surprise in this industry is, this might sound like a cliche, but it's actually the innovation which is coming from this industry. Now, this is an industry which is highly, highly regulated. I think everyone has touched upon the kind of regulations here. You're from the regulated industry. We have so many people and so many lawyers out the space that regulations are so strong out here, and they keep changing, right? And because of the changing regulations, the kind of innovation that is required in this industry to succeed is really, really high. So if you look into the overall value chain of the cannabis industry, right from source to seed, from seed to sales, right from cultivation, the kind of innovation which is happening out there, from gene technology, from light spectrum technology, from cultivation, from seeds, to right to the other end, to the distribution, to the transportation of it. The kind of innovation that is happening out there is amazing. In fact, some of the startups that I've actually worked with really came up with very innovative solutions, but it was the industry was not mature enough to adopt those solutions. And so they basically pivoted and they moved out of this cannabis industry and adopted the same solution in other industries, right? So the innovation which was happening here, it did not really get adopted in this industry. It's being used in other industries right now. So that's the state that I'm actually seeing out here.
And Alex, same question for you.
Sure, and our Darshan talked about innovation, so I'm going to move on to my next point. I'm a people person, so I'll talk about the people. And what I found really interesting about this industry and surprising about it is that the type of people who are innovating within it. And there's the typical tech entrepreneurs and other types of entrepreneurs who we see. But what I've learned is we also shouldn't be discounting the people who are sort of coming from the legacy market and who are innovating within this. And the reason for that is that this isn't a new industry. We're not creating something from scratch, and legalization is definitely opening it up for innovation, but there's a lot of people who have been doing interesting things. And if you've been operating in the illicit market or have been just involved in cannabis for a long time, you understand cannabis in a way that people who don't have that long-standing relationship do, and you understand cannabis consumers in a way that people who don't have that long-standing relationship. So I'm surprised by the people who I initially thought were, the stoner types who are going to sort of fade out, actually are quite interesting in this space. And also why they're interesting, this speaks back to Ardesh's point about regulation, is these are the types of people who have spilled over regulation and the core challenges and looking for loopholes. And the best type of innovation in a really tightly regulated space is people who find gaps in those regulations. So that's what I've been surprised about, is the type of people who are coming up with different ideas.
So then, and it's a good point, as a lawyer, so we're obviously very focused on the legal market and the regulations, but maybe as a follow-up for you, Alex, I guess, are there things that you've seen, even around regulatory matters or otherwise, that startups, aren't thinking about that they really should be? Kind of what are those landmines, those pitfalls that you've seen startups, particularly in this sector, have to try to navigate?
Sure. I mean, like the biggest issue in terms of regulation, I think, for really early stage companies is how you're going to grow, how you're going to do your sales, how you're going to do your marketing, especially if you're consumer facing. There's very strict regulations of the Cannabis Act around how you can market. Secondly, if you're you want to advertise on Google or on Facebook, you can't. And that's not a regulatory issue, but that's a decision that those platforms have made. So that's a big challenge there. And I guess more generally about what I think people aren't thinking about is that this space is already very, very crowded because it's hard to reach your customers, and B, because it's so tightly regulated and because there's these behemoth LPs, licensed producers, who are operating in the space at such scale, it's pretty narrow, and you have to look at where the spaces are and how to work with those licensed producers to get to market. Because I think those LPs will continue to dominate the space, and they have a lot of cash, and they can do what you can do pretty quickly if it's not incredibly unique. So I think you have to focus on, if you're looking at innovating in the space, is look at how you can best serve those licensed producers, solve their business problems, and also how you can look at sort of what your exits are to them, what is interesting to them, and how you can be acquired by them.
I guess same question for you, Adarsh.
Sure, absolutely. So it's not that people don't know about it. People definitely know that whenever they are getting into this cannabis business, especially the startups, and to your point, the kind of people who are getting into this business are the people who think they really understand the industry really well, but they don't really understand the complexity of the regulations in this. So for example, one of the companies I was talking to just the other day was saying that in order to get the license, they have to store high-def video of their farm for about 2 years. So when you think about that and the kind of infrastructure and the capital investment that's required to get the security compliances going is really, really high. So they actually underestimate the kind of investments that's required, the kind of knowledge as well as the investment even in security and compliance that they have to make in order to succeed in this. There are people around who have been applying for licenses 2013 have not yet got it. So I think those are the biggest challenges that people are not really understanding unless they get into this industry.
So assuming you're a company and you've been able to successfully navigate the whole regulatory regime, which does really change on a weekly, monthly basis. It's funny, I find this industry, it's like we're working in dog years, right? Every month is really a year in the cannabis sector. But what do you think now are kind of the most compelling areas for companies to focus on? We've heard earlier tonight from 4 really terrific companies that are going beyond just we're going to be licensed producers, we're going to cultivate, who are really pushing the boundaries, looking at different verticals. So Adarsh, what have you seen in terms of that you think are the most compelling areas right now?
I think when the concept of blockchain was released, I think the first people started thinking was, how do you involve, because one of the biggest challenges in this industry is tracking and traceability, right? So they definitely want to start using blockchain to track the traceability right from seed to sale of the product. So that's definitely one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of innovation happening. The second area is all around the cultivation side, right? So there are a lot of gene and biotech companies who are innovating across the different kind of crops, the kind of hybrids that are really coming out. And because that's exactly what the consumers are trying to figure out as to what will really work for them. And this probably boils down to all the medical facilities which are coming up in trying and helping their patients as well as the consumers understand what does it take to, consume. What does it mean to consume? I remember the first time I consumed, I'm sorry, yes, I did. The first time I consumed, yeah, I shouldn't be sorry about it. There you go, the taboo thing is still there. But the first time I consumed, I thought I'm dying. And when I heard Pink Floyd in the background, I was like, okay, finally I'm coming back to life. So yeah, I know it's the most cliche thing possible, but I actually went through that and I do relate to that. So considering all those factors in, I think the way people consume and adopt this particular product is extremely interesting to see how will that change the industry.
And I guess for you, Alex, we work closely with Leap Forward, and you just had a cohort of really phenomenal companies that I know you've really helped a lot. So you've seen a lot of, also tons of startups. So same thing, what are the most kind of compelling startups? Where are they focused?
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus, people are focusing all over right now, and I think the way I like to compartmentalize is to think about what the priorities are for today, tomorrow, and down the road. So I think the priorities for today is about the flow of information. So that's about what you were speaking to a little bit earlier, is how do we better educate people and how do we better reach people? So how do we better educate people on what the strains are right for them? How do we help people understand what research has gone into understanding what strains are best for them? Because that helps break down some of the stigma and the barriers around that. And then it's about figuring out compliant ways to market. And I think that's just going to be such a huge challenge. And you look at Lyft and Leafly and other sort of strain reviews and Canvas, obviously, who are helping ease that process of understanding what's good for you. And then, as we move ahead, it'll be sort of in store and actually helping with that purchasing process. So what kind of in-store activations, what kind of loyalties exist, point of sales, that type of data retention. And then, moving on to how to make that even easier, right? So something that just really impresses me out of the States is ease. And I think that's just an incredible platform which has on-demand cannabis delivery. And they can get you through a medical referral and pick up at your local dispensary and deliver to your door within an hour and a half. So that's incredible. I think making that easier. And then I can keep going, but then it's about easing the actual use, right? So that's about medical devices. So there's Syke, SYQE. They're an Israeli-based company that has basically meter dosing and all sorts of very interesting information to have reliable dosing. There's Dosist, which is essentially a vape pen that has, again, reliable dosing. Reliable dosing, I think, is going to be one of the big innovations. And then, the next sort of category, I'd say, once we move past, the undersupply issues, and once we get to an oversupply issues in this market, will be how to get more out of your cultivation and how to create more innovative products downstream. So that means where Ample Organics comes in to create better business processes and be more efficient in your cultivation, all the way through to I saw the flow filter guys here somewhere. So how just cheaper, better actual equipment that you use in your facility, to automation and hardware and technology that actually creates the environments which you're cultivating in to get more out of each square foot.
So clearly you hit a lot. You hit
a lot of things. Sorry.
But again, there's a lot of terrific companies doing a lot of terrific and innovative things here. So I guess to you, when you're evaluating companies, they come to you. They've applied for the Terrifically Forward program. What's the most important consideration that you're looking for?
Sure. So I mean, the typical thing that anyone says is the team, but that's obvious in any sector. The second is that you've actually taken the time to look at the regulations yourself and figure out if it's compliant. Because we do deal with really early stage companies who probably haven't shelled out cash to hire a great lawyer like Eric at Denton's. So so take the time to evaluate that, and then I think understanding the ecosystem is incredibly important. Understanding where you fit within that and what problem you're solving within the greater ecosystem. If this, again, because it always comes back to regulation and how tightly regulated it is. So if you don't understand, you can't exist on your own. You're not in a vacuum in this industry. You have to really understand who your partners are and who you're dealing with at all angles. And finally, sort of I think an interesting litmus test is if you talk about what words you use. So I say if people are using the word cannabis or marijuana, and I'm not a stickler, around words, but if they use cannabis, it shows that they've sort of done their research into the industry and understand that that's like the professional and the proper term to use. So that's just an interesting indicator that I look at.
So you know, you're obviously very sector focused at Darsh. When you think Microsoft, you know, the first thing I think of when I hear Microsoft, it's not cannabis. So you're working with startups across all different sectors, but as you mentioned earlier, there's probably a lot of learnings that you've had in your experience with cannabis companies. Have there been and have you been able, you know, have they been able to impact the way you and Microsoft operate and take those learnings with respect to the other sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. So from Microsoft's perspective, I think Microsoft made news about a year ago being one of the first tech giants to work with the cannabis industry. So they basically came up with a version of their CRM, the dynamic software, and they call it D365 Cannabis, which is essentially a software and ERP to track completely from seed to sale. So that's exactly what we got involved. And the basic premise of that is, as long as we're not touching the leaf, we are trying to help in the operations of it, we are good. So that's the kind of the compliance and regulation as to how Microsoft started working with that. When I got into this job, I've been working with startups across the industry. I'm working with health startups. I'm working with AI startups. I'm working with fintech startups, a whole bunch of them. Cannabis is very unique like that. In fact, in Canada, I've probably not worked with too many of them. I can probably name two of them that I've actually worked with. So the first thing I try to really learn is what is involved for a startup to succeed in this. So that was one of the biggest learnings. Like I really had to go through a lot of startups, talk to my friends who are in the US and understand what kind of learnings have they had in those industries. So that's one aspect. The second aspect out here is that the average startups that are coming are actually really small. And exactly to your point, a lot of them are literally pre-seed. A lot of them are still figuring out what to do in this industry because the compliance keeps changing and they do not really have a fixed business model as to how to really succeed in this. So coming from a capital standpoint, the really early stage, and for us to invest and actually help them understand what it takes to succeed, we really need to know what are the different factors. So we always play the technology play out here. And someone in the past just mentioned we always consider ourselves to be a technology partner versus a vendor in terms of helping them get onboarded onto our platforms, helping them understand how can Microsoft really help you grow on that particular platform. So it's been very different. The cannabis industry is very, very unique, highly regulated, and all of that always comes with it. So I think it's a great learning experience even for me, and really interesting to understand across the spectrum, right from seed to sale, as to how do you actually work and succeed in each and every step.
Terrific. Yeah, no, we see the same thing in terms of, you know, people always come to us and I love working in the sector because it is so innovative and there's not precedence, right? A lot of what lawyers do, it's kind of turn the same documents over and over again. And more than ever, we have companies coming to us now saying, okay, we just met, you know, company A just met company B and we just struck this deal. Here it is on a piece of paper. Go figure out how to make this legal or is illegal. And we actually get to think and be creative. So it's a lot of fun. So I guess, you know, just to sum up, and then I'm sure we have some questions from the audience, I guess, you know, in your mind, what's next, Adarsh, really? Like, where do you see this all going in the next, you know, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years? You're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. Like, this is here to stay.
Right, absolutely. And the next thing that's definitely coming up is on the recreational side. So it'll be really interesting to see what's going to happen, what kind of startups are really coming up on the recreational side of things. A lot of innovation is definitely going to happen on the packaging and the marketing side of things, as really pointed out, as to how can you actually market the product without really marketing it as such. So that's going to be interesting. The second thing we'll definitely see is around the adoption of these new technologies. Now, we're just talking about blockchain right now, but there's definitely a beautiful confluence of blockchain, AI, and analytics. So as and when people get more capital, especially startups, to invest in this industry, that's the time they're going to also invest in technology and software to track the entire process out. So that's also going to happen. So probably because there's a lot of capital flowing in, I would say. There's a lot of money to be made out here. And because of the unregulated state till now, people have just made money and not invested in the process of doing good business across. So I think that's exactly what's going to come in soon. And people are going to invest because if at all you do not invest, you will not be compliant and you won't really have a business running. So that's probably the next few things I see coming.
And I guess same question to you. I know you have more new cohorts coming up and boot camps and all sorts of exciting stuff. But in your mind, Alex, where is this going?
For the industry as a whole, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation. We're already seeing it, so that's something just to keep your eye on. And we're going to see a lot of sort of sink or swim. So it's who's going to adopt new technologies. On sort of on a startup side, I think what will be the most interesting thing to watch is the combination of genetics and analytics, and how analytics and user feedback. We can say a shout out to the strain print guys if they're still here, who are gathering that feedback and what strains work, and then cultivators and science, whoever's doing it, labs, who are creating the genetics that people want and give them consistent, reliable effects that people are looking for.
Terrific. So I think we have time for just one question. So hope it's a good one. Maybe there's no questions.
We were excellent.
Maybe I asked all the questions already. All right.
Well, so like coming in the summer, what do you think? Like, can you paint a little picture for us of how things are going to be? Is the tech industry behind it all going to be ready to? I was speaking to someone who's going to be doing the payments. She says they're ready. Nothing's going to crash. So how's it going to be? Is everything like lined up, ready to go? Are you guys, do you interface with the government teams, that are?
So personally, I do not interface with the government teams.
Okay.
But what I've been reading, I think, and this is just my opinion, I guess, I think the biggest challenge out here comes back to the education piece. So when the Ontario Cannabis Store comes up, it's going to be run by LCBO, I think the biggest challenge, which I'm just thinking, if I go to the store and I'm trying to buy this, there has to be some kind of an educational component. So I don't even know whether the store owners or the store or the person who's actually giving it out is educated enough to help you understand this is going to be right for you or not right for you, and what kind of information will this particular person tell you that, hey, this is what I really want. So where's that education piece coming through? I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges in terms of readiness of adoption. So that's one of the biggest points, I think.
From a legal standpoint, I don't think we're ready. And again, actually, I'll mention my partner James Wishart is over there, and he's one of Canada's leading regulatory lawyers in the cannabis sector. And I suspect he'll echo the same thing. But I always tell people, when this actually opens, it's going to look like the release of a new iPhone. I've said it a million times, but it's going to be lineups literally around the blocks. There's not going to be enough supply, at least for the first 9 months. And then all of a sudden there'll be a huge glut of supply when we start seeing all of these huge grows finally come online. The 800,000 square feet, million square feet. But this is going really fast, right? And laws normally don't change this fast. So the provincial governments are all scrambling because the feds have just basically said this is happening. So provinces, go figure it out yourselves. So I think it'll be really interesting from a legal standpoint.
And if I can add just on a positive note, there will be a lot of problems, but in the end, we will have legal cannabis in Canada, and I think that's a great thing for the people and for the country and for the economy, and I think it's a really thing that we should appreciate and put the problems aside and just embrace it. Yeah, it's
Terrific. Well, Alex and Josh, thank you guys so much. Very informative, and thank you to everybody else.
Thank you, everyone.